Men of the 24th Infantry. This is Texas. And we have a great opportunity here. A legacy, if proven worthy, will carry us all the way to the shores of France. Things are a little different down here in the South. I will expect you men to obey the racial code.
Yes, sir.
Get back with the others. Just go ahead and drive this machine.
Officer Cross.
This is a white man's world. Every man here has got a lit fuse.
Jim Crow's the law. Respect it. What we gonna do?
The police brutalize us, sir. All we want is to be treated as soldiers.
As military police, you are to ensure order of the men of the 24th Infantry only.
Drop the knife.
Back up!
I was robbed of my honor. You get out of here before they take yours too.
The general can get the 24th in the fight.
He's never going to do that.
What do we do, sir?
William, I've done all I can do here.
We have a problem. We're gonna take our country back.
Law run this town.
There's a militia on the way.
Are they?
Which way did they go?
Keep pushing people down. Sooner or later, they rise up.
Fire!
Can you identify any of the leaders of the mutiny?
They're coming!
When I aimed the gun, I saw a man. He didn't see one back.
Trai and Kevin, thank you for being on the Brown and Black podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So let's begin immediately with why you felt that this story in particular, 24th, was the story for you to tell out of so many other stories that are out there that have gone silent, that have not been taught in textbooks, that most people not even heard of. Why in this one in particular was important for you to tell?
I kind of originated with me, and then Trai and I hooked up and really brought it to what you see today. For me, it started from seeing the photograph of the trial. And the trial photograph, there's really one photo of the trial. And when I saw that photo, 63 black soldiers being surrounded by white soldiers with fixed bayonets. And the caption said, the largest murder trial in American history. And I said, well, what's this all about? So the fact that it was a hidden history was a big part of it. But I think part of it in terms of really movies and imagery and the things that you guys are all about in terms of your show is that, they fought back. They fought. And the fighting back part of it is, I think, makes it different than a lot of the stories we've seen in the past. And what history we do know, that horrific period from 1880 to 1930 or so in America, where their black communities are just being wiped out. They're just being genocided. Folks do know of that. They know of the victimization of these things, but they don't know that, that sometimes people fought back. And in most cases, actually, they fought back. But in no case they fight back like they fought back in Houston. And the fact that they fought back the way they fought in Houston really kind of changes the cinematic history dynamic of this. And it also changed the actual reality of how the case was handled, how the incident was handled.
One of the things that you do best, can I call you Kevin? Okay.
Sure, of course.
One of the things that you do best, Kevin, I think, now I'm a film critic, pop culture pundit, but I'm also a filmmaker and a screenwriter. And recently I was writing a screenplay that took place in the past. And prior to that, I was writing another screenplay that took place in the past, and it's about African American history. And I came to the realization that, you know, the way we don't learn things, as Jack was saying, in school, the way we don't know ourselves, not only does it shape our current identity, but it shapes us for the future. And the realization I came to is that if you change the past, you change the future. So I want to know from both of you, and I have to assume, because I know your work, I have to assume Trai was really integral to creating that main character that everybody, you know, understands and follow his journey. Why do you think it's important to tell the history and really not pull any punches, because you don't?
Well, I think you know, the term I always use is, I think in American life, the history owns us. We don't own the history. And that how the history owns us is that one of the reasons what we probably don't know about the Houston Riot is that teachers didn't know how to teach it. People didn't even know really how, they didn't even know how to talk about it. And so Black folks, white folks, kind of, you know, no one knew how to talk about it in the public space, really. And so oftentimes these things just got buried. I mean, Black people were made to feel embarrassed about the Houston Riot. And so the Black community itself even ends up kind of shutting down and steering away from it. And as well, obviously the white community, you know, liberal whites are you know, afraid that they use the Houston Riot against African Americans. They used it as an excuse not to integrate the military until the 1950s. And so, you know, these kind of incidents oftentimes were used against African Americans, and then whites would also, you know, often just not know how to respond to it. I mean, you know, obviously the people against African American progress used it to like keep the military segregated. Others just kind of put it away because they felt like it hurt the cause in some kind of way. And that whole thing that is still present today in so many ways. That whole thing, you know, still governs the way we look at the past. We don't learn much about this because teachers don't know how to teach it. They're not instructed how to teach it. They feel guilty teaching it. And when people watch these movies, they start to feel guilty. You're not in the screen. You didn't do this. You don't have anything to feel guilty about. The guilt that I think often people feel is that they don't know about it, and their ignorance oftentimes makes them feel guilty. But we've got to move past that. We got to find a way to own this history and to be able to tell these stories, not in a way that shuts people down. And because that's, you know, George Floyd's death and murder could have basically happened 103 years ago in Houston. And that then we just continue to recycle and repeat this history over and over and over again because the history owns us. We don't own the history. And so that's that to me, and part of owning that history is giving it to people uncut. You need to know how it really happened. You need to know it unfiltered and uncensored so that you get the full impact of why we have had this history in this country that we've lived in, right? This history is, you know, so bad and so turbulent and so racial and so violent that we literally hide it. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it, we literally hide it. So that for me, that's why, you know, we come at it the way we do.
We keep talking about this, like history owns us. We don't own history, but we've tried to own it, which is why we give you what we want you to have. We teach the children what we want them to have. Imagine it. If I don't take to your history, I get an F. If I get an F, that dictates how I live my life moving forward. That's a scarlet letter that follows me into whom I marry, where I go to school, what kind of job I receive, because you wanted to own the history instead of allow the history to own us, allow us to be identified by what we've done together, how we've lived together, how we fought together, how we've loved together. It's cut up. And there's so much like ignorance is bliss, I think, in our time, in current day. And nobody wants to talk about this because, you know, I'm far removed from it. I didn't do it. My mom didn't do it. You're talking about slavery. You're talking about the turn of the 20th century. Seeing is believing. And now we have cameras to catch people, and we feel so much more. In 65 in Selma, you know, King wanted you to see what happened at Edmund Pettus Bridge. That way you could feel it. And with these films now, where people still want to own the history, you know, it's about what you see. If you don't see this, you won't think this way. You won't think there's a point of reference that you need to be able to communicate, because communication has been lost. Communication has been dictated by the people, by oppressors who want you to speak their language and aren't considerate of the compassion or the language of compassion between the races in our nation, in our world. We need to feel it. I mean, as an actor, as a screenwriter, as a filmmaker, just in general, like, this is why we do what we do, so that we can own it together, so that we can raise the notion that it's not just what you say. You know, our experience is a collective one. Our nation is made of the collective. It's a melting pot of all of us, Black, white, Hispanic, everybody that we're blessed to have here to make this thing up. So, you know, controversial or not, cautionary tale or not, stories like these need to be told so that we have a point of reference, and we have, you know, we can speak from a place not just of oppression, not just of pain, but of pride in knowing who we are, even if it's controversial. I mean, as an actor, that just motivates me to continue to tell stories like these, and that's that's what hooked into me with this story initially.
How much time did you both dedicate to make this happen? How difficult was the journey to film it? And do you feel that you've accurately portrayed what happened in history in this film?
It started a long time ago. It started about 30 years ago when I saw that photograph. And I wrote the script about 30 years ago. And at that time, I think I would argue that Hollywood was a different place. I mean, Hollywood was, Black dramas, historical dramas specifically, very hard to make. If you got them made, they had to have a white character who was kind of central to the story as well. And that was the very thing I was trying to not do. I did not want it to be, I wanted to be from the point of view of these men. Yeah. I wanted it to be from the Black point of view. And point of view is critical to telling stories of history, because, you know, we've been fed the history oftentimes in that biracial, that white, Black, white, Latino, whatever the story may be. We need a white character in there because Hollywood, and literally I had a producer tell me this one time. He told me white people don't want to see movies where all the white people are bad. I literally had a producer tell me that one time. And the way I've always felt about that is, in history, sometimes there was not a white guy in the room. Sometimes there wasn't a white guy in the situation that did the right thing. You know, and that's just a historical fact. Doesn't mean that down the street there wasn't some good white folks, but in this situation they weren't there, and that didn't happen. And oftentimes they wanted us to put a white character in these films to make it they felt palatable for white audiences. I think white people are better than that. I think the white people that are not better than that are not going to see this movie in the first place. But the white people that are better than that want the real deal. They go to movies like this because they want the uncut truth. They want what really did happen, and so that's a big part of it. And so the movie I just couldn't get the movie made. That script would give me other jobs, but I couldn't get any traction. And so I was working on BlacKkKlansman at the time, and Trai and I had done Destination Planet Negro and Jayhawkers, and we wanted to work on something else. I said, "Hey man, I got this script. I've been wanting to get back to it. Let's make the romance bigger. Let's update it." And I just gave it to Trai, He ran with it and came back and did all the changes that I thought the script needed. And we worked on it some more. And I'd always thought Trai would be perfect for Boston. You know, when he was in school at KU, and I was his professor, and we talked about it, and I just knew he would be great. I just knew he was perfect for the role, and he is perfect for the role. And so that, from that point of view, that's how it kind of started from me, and I'll let Trai take over from there.
But what Kevin isn't telling you is he is a wealth of knowledge. Like, you come to his house, I would fly down from wherever I was to come to Lawrence, and like, this books, paperwork splayed everywhere. Like, where do we start?
It was like a forensic, like,
it's literally just a wealth of knowledge. And there's so many, you know, there's so many different references, and just in general, in terms of like so many different source material, but not to the point to where it could really explain the night. It was raining really hard. People couldn't see, you know, who was there and who was doing what to, I don't want to give too much away, but who was doing what to, you know, to them ultimately. And then the court martialing of itself done really quickly, no due process. I mean, it's just, to this day, it's still, you know, mired in controversy in terms of what should have been done, who specifically did what, you know what I mean? And, you know, I think that gave us the liberty. First of all, it kind of put us in a position where it had to be, you know, inspired by true events, but that gave us the liberty to tell other true stories that we deal with today, that have been dealt with, you know, since Black people were in the country in the first place, since came over on the boat. We're dealing with, you know, intra-racial relationships. We're dealing with colorism. We're dealing with the stigma of the scarlet letter and, you know, the dark-skinned man in a romance with the light-skinned man in a romance with a dark-skinned woman. And just breaking down all of the miseducations of what, or even miscommunications of what is proper in the Black community. And to me, that's what keeps it relevant, you know, as far as we can watch this film and say, wow, I dealt with this, my grandmother dealt with this. This is, you know, it's hitting home for me. That not much has changed in terms of the way that they police, but also not much has changed with the way that we see ourselves because of what was ingrained in our identity since slavery. And I mean, it really is a film of accountability in terms of, yes, race relations and violence in the name of racism, which is completely wrong, and no one deserves. I mean, it should be eradicated from life as we know it. But there's also things to deal with in terms of who we are individually, because we make up the nation together. Right. Once we can understand ourselves individually, find that strength, find that history and the honor that lies within that, we can truly be who we are individually, and we can add to the collective and build, you know, a nation that it should have been instead of that it is now.
I think we can end the interview right there. Well, actually, you answered another question I was going to ask both of you, and it had to do with, you know, how every character represented some aspect of African-American life then and now. But one of the things that really came through was that at the end of the day, these are human beings. And how, what is it to be human? At what point do you lose your humanity? What point do you forget that person is human? And part of it has to do with what you say the film is doing is it's changing the narrative. And you also touched upon language. So I just want to know if both of you could talk a little bit about one of the things that happens in this country all the time. You know, you hear people in Texas saying they want the Latinos to go back home. You know, they were there before
kill us.
You know,
Walmart.
The Latinos were there before the white people. But the narrative that they have is that they have this ownership, so their perspective. So can you talk a little bit about changing the narrative, perspective, and just the language that we tell ourselves?
Well, sure. Well, you know, that incident at the Walmart is a great example of how, you know, we show in the film that, you know, communities of color had been attacked specifically. You know, people know about Tulsa now because of Watchmen, but these communities of color had been attacked all over the place during this rise of segregation and Jim Crow, and And now those same communities of color are being attacked now because kind of a reassertion of almost like a new attempt at making things, white supremacy, bringing back white supremacy again. Not that it's ever totally gone away, but
making America great again, right?
Yes, making America great again. And so you've got these incidents where synagogues are attacked and Latino communities are attacked and Black communities are. Churches are attacked and all these horrible incidents that are happening. And so it comes out of the same thing that the soldiers are living in the 24th. They are living in this time where communities of color are being attacked. And so there's this paranoia they have about an attack can come at any time, any place, anywhere.
Right.
And so the reality of a mob coming is not some crazy notion. The mobs were there last week, so that's a big part of kind of, for me, a big part of the historical part of it. The other part of it for me is just that I was in a riot in high school. I was in a race riot in high school, and I got to see guys I knew break. Guys, there was a really racial, messed up situation that kept boiling and boiling and boiling. And just as Dr. King says, a riot is the language of the unheard. When people are unheard for so long, at some point they just break. And that's why when you see riots on television, and you say, why are they burning down their own neighborhood? Man, these guys that I knew who were friends of mine, they just started doing stuff that I didn't understand at all. And I understood their frustration and fear and anger because I had that same anger too, but they had reached the point they didn't give a damn anymore. And when you reach to that point, you don't give a damn anymore. There's no logic to anything. In fact, the Houston Riot, I would argue, is probably one of the most logical riots and rebellions because they still held together in the beginning like a military force. And then as the night went on, they broke up and split up, and it just became, the rage just takes over and there's no accountability about anything. But that's the nature of that kind of racial frustration. When it blows, get out of the way. Get out of the way.
I Am Man. It's a very powerful moment in the film. And I wanted to, Trai, have you talk about the strength of Corporal William Boston. This is a man that never discharged his gun. He never killed anybody during that moment, yet ideologically, he was willing to die for that moment, for what that meant, and for the justice that needed to happen. Can you talk about how both of you went ahead and wrote Boston in that way, and the strength that he had? Because it's inspirational to a certain extent, but it's also, there's a moment where you just, I think we're so conditioned to see a happy ending. That we wanted to see him live and tell the story to his grandkids. Can you talk a little bit about the strength of a lot of these characters, in particular Boston?
I mean, Boston is, I said this, Kevin, you remember me saying, he's a superhero. Like, this dude is my superhero. Like, it's just the level of sacrifice in the name of love and honor and brotherhood and legacy, and in a way, Boston is the audience. He's in that juxtaposed position where there's, being active and inactive at the same time, concerned about participation in terms of brotherhood and loyalty, but on the fence about humanity and what this does to me to participate, being caught in that space. And I think that's where we want the audience, just in general, why we couldn't afford to, hold the punches in this film, why we had to give it the way that we gave it, because it's conflicting, and with a person like Boston, who, is born of slaves turned abolitionists, raised in an abolitionist community, sent off to school, as progressive as it gets, but loses his parents, has an understanding of his position in legacy in terms of, his parents, the blood of his family, and the strife that the people are living in and with his people that look like him. He had to come back. He had to go, I was thinking James Baldwin, Why I Left America. Yeah, he had to come back. He had to come back, and to be able to do that, to with the intention of helping, of giving everything that he had, not from a position of privilege, but from a position of brotherhood. I got it, so you're gonna have it. And then having to deal with colorism in a way that he hasn't before, having to deal with racism outside and inside of his culture at the same time, and still hold on to those values. That's a Superman. that's it's Martin Luther King, it's Booker T. Washington, it's W.B. Du Bois, it's Obama. You know what I mean? Like to be caught in a position where you have to be something for one group and then you have to be something for another. Who are you to yourself? And can you live with what you do in that moment? I think that's everybody's life. And, I hope, just as in terms of the audience that watches that they can see that we're in that moment now as a nation. Right now, we're literally caught between, loyalty, our culture, and our very lives. In terms of lives, in terms of who are we? Who are we to our children? What are our kids going to say about us? You know what I mean? If I do this, yes, it's I'm down, but I'm also out. You know what I mean? In terms of my own humanity, I don't know what I would have done. But it's inspiring, almost to tears. It's inspiring. And I think that, that's the soul of the people that we represented. Not a group of people, vigilantes or whatever, who wanted to just go out for the sake of revenge, but people who felt they had no choice for the present and for the future. I mean, and it's, I don't want to make it noble, but it's certainly sacrificial, wouldn't you say?
No.
And I mean, I can go on and on about Boston and the men, but in particular, it's really something, the sacrifice of, having two opportunities to live his own life, do his own thing, whether that was, continue to stay in France and do his thing, come over, here and go to the officer training school with his woman and just leave the guys. And when there was a problem, he stood up. Didn't talk about it. He just did it. Show me your words, I'll show you my deeds. That's the kind of man that Boston is. And it's pretty damn inspiring.
I'm just going to say that Trai and I based Boston on one of the real soldiers there, this guy by the name of Baltimore. And, we don't know much about his real history. We fictionalized his story, came up with his background and so forth. But we do know he was a beloved figure in the regiment. He was a beloved figure. And they really kind of marched on the city because, in many ways, because of their love for him, because he was so well respected. And when you see his photograph, I mean, we were able to find which soldier he was in the big photograph. And when you see his face, there's just something, I mean, it's very haunting in the sense that, these guys, they fought in San Juan Hill, they fought in the Philippine insurrection, they would fight anybody, any place, anywhere for America, knowing that they did not have their rights at home. They were fighting for rights they did not have themselves. They knew that. So the very nature of them is sacrificial. I mean, the very nature of Black soldiers, Latino soldiers, Asian soldiers. World War II is another great example. That Asian soldiers fighting in Germany, and their parents are in a concentration camp, in an internment camp back home. And so they are. There's a sacrificial kind of nature to the very element of soldiers, Black soldiers, soldiers of color, that just goes inherent. I would argue, really up until the last little conflicts we have. I mean, that problem is still existing in Vietnam in a major way. We did that in Five Bloods, but it's like that. It's just now these last Iraq, kind of stuff, that Afghanistan, that these problems aren't just burden on the soldiers of color that are fighting.
Well, I just want to ask you both some questions from a creative standpoint, because as a filmmaker, I look at everything as a film lover, film critic, and a filmmaker. And the fact that I've seen so much of your work, Kevin, I've watched you grow as a writer, and there's definitely an elegance to the way you tell stories. And I have to agree with you. I think, you talked about these teachers not knowing how to teach history. I have to say, I think film is probably one of the most powerful mediums you could possibly have to really teach us about our past. So I'm wondering, with the experience of you at this point, at least 7 years since I spoke to you, working with Spike, doing the other films you've done, and then with you, Trai, having, developed a character for 4 or 5 seasons, what were you able to bring to this piece now at this point in your careers that maybe you wouldn't have been able to do 7 years ago in terms of how you can tell stories?
Well, for me, I think that every story you tell, every film you make, you learn and you grow from it. And how, how I think I grew from this film was really a big part of it is point of view. And point of view to me, I'll get a little technical here, but I think it's really important because, we tried to tell a film where Boston was at the center of really everything that goes on in the film. We really don't break point of view from him. When we do go to other characters, they're talking kind of still about Boston. They're still talking about the situation that they're invested in with him. And that to me has become a real big part of storytelling for me. That's a big technical kind of thing that I'm really kind of convinced about. The movies that I love, oftentimes, I would argue, I tell my students is the movies that win Best Actor for an actor, most of the time they are movies that are told totally from that character's point of view. And even when you go to other characters, they're talking about the central character in those scenes. So that's something that I'm a big proponent of that. I try to remember that in everything I do. Really, if I'm telling an Arthur Ashe story now, and I'm trying to do that for him, and we try to do that with the 24th, and I think that's a big. I think it really helps in terms of in making the audience invest in not just the main character, but the things that the main character is invested in. So the fact that Boston has dedicated himself to all these other, to the challenge and the mission of all of this, you invest in him, but you also invest in all his friends, all his comrades, his problem outside, his love life, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I was on Empire for 6 seasons, and I've been working before that, and I was in school. Before that, I was in school for 10 years. Honing the craft and going from place to place. Fortunate to go from a 2-year to an all Black institution, mostly HBCU at Prairie View, and then majority white at the University of Kansas, and AMDA in LA, and then Yale School of Drama, which wasn't a whole lot of us, but, a whole lot of history. And I just feel that, from place to place, I just feel blessed that God has taken me from place to place and prepared me and equipped me in such a way to be able to meet the moment. At Empire, every year, for the most part, I'd start the year off by saying, what do I want to work on? I felt more like an actor for hire than an actor. Now, this, to me, this is where my career begins, and I wanted to be ready for this moment. So every year, I would challenge myself. This year, I'm going to work on, if I'm going to be here, let me grow. So this year, I'm going to work on listening. Whole year goes by. Next year, I'm going to work on just straight silence. This year, I'm going to interrupt and see, what I can do as far as interrupting people and what that brings out of somebody else. This year, I'm going to, every year it was something completely different to elicit different responses from, my cast, from me, and see what room there was to wiggle and play. So when we got to the 24th, I was ready. You know what I mean? It was a profound story, an important story. You want to do things technically right, but in between all that is life. And I'd lived enough life, you know, in my opinion, and had enough experiences in front of the camera doing various things, like dedicated to doing various things, you know, repetitiously for years after year after year, that, you know, when it came time to play, I was ready. And I say that to say, you know, I've just been focused on how I learn, not just in school, but as a human being with other human beings, because that's what we're playing. That's what we're eliciting, the soul of man, and the best that man can be and the worst that man can be, and where we are in between. And, you know, the only way to find that is to, outside of my perspective anyway, is to play in other people's perspectives. So, yeah, I mean, I felt like that got me ready. And it also, you know, working with various people, you learn how to take direction. You kind of get a little bit of an idea about, you know, what's in between their note and your desire as an actor, and try and play the lines as best you can. Very athletic, but you need training.
As a Latino man, I was watching this movie, and from my interpretation of it, you know, it was very interesting to see these stories that haven't really been told from the Black experience. And, you know, I kept on thinking, it's like the Latino experience also isn't told. Latinos have been a part of the American Revolutionary War. They've been a part of every single war. Yet you don't see any movies like 24th about the Latino experience, about the soldiers that fought in these wars. And I need that. Mm-hmm. I need that for me. I need to know what my contributions were. I mean, just recently, Mike and I were talking about the American Latino Museum. We don't even have one. We have pockets here in different cities that don't really tell our stories. And I wanted to ask you guys, you've been able to do 24th. Why do you think that you don't see films about Latino soldiers or the Latino history there? Is it truly difficult for us to get these movies done? Is there any interest for these types of movies? Is there a need and a desire to listen to those stories as well?
Clearly, yes. I mean, you know, I feel the same way you did. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I make the movies I make is because I felt just like you said. I didn't see myself. You know, I wanted. When I was go see as a kid, I go see a John Wayne movie, and you know, or any movie damn near, and we weren't there. We weren't there. You see those movies on television, we weren't there, and so, you know, that was a big thing for me growing up. I think that a big part of the problem is that Latino filmmakers have to make those films. And so that really means that Latino filmmakers have to have enough juice in Hollywood to get, a Latino director has to have enough juice in Hollywood to get that film made. I mean, things did not progress for us until Spike had his success. I mean, until then, in the 70s, you had Gordon Parks, you had a few other Black directors, but as a whole, there were not a lot of Black films from a Black point of view about Black history specifically not being made. And so it's really, I would argue, it's just really been just the last 10 years or so that things have moved forward. And I think the next step is for Latino filmmakers to do that same thing. I think that they have to, and it's not even, you don't ask permission. You just have to tell us. I mean, we you know, they're not, you know, white Hollywood's not going to say, it's time for the Latino now. It's like, you just have to do it and then show them and they go, oh, it's time for the Latino now. And,
like Melvin Van Peebles.
Yes, that's literally how it works. I mean, there's no kind of permission. You can't have a meeting and they figure it out. It's not probably going to happen. You do it and you do it successfully. I mean, a movie, you know, when a movie does it, and I mean, when you look at Spike's success in the 80s, early 80s, when Black directors weren't even a concept, you know, he makes this little film and it makes a lot of money, and suddenly it's like, you know, black people could be directors. You know, that's a hell of a deal. Let's maybe start thinking about that. And the same thing applies here. I think the minute somebody, you know, makes a big film, you know, doesn't have to be big size film, but a film that makes money and tells that Latino story that we've not heard, that we're talking about. I think things change from that. I think that's Hollywood then takes notice and they get interested and then they suddenly discover, oh, there's all this history that we've not been telling. And there's this raft of incredible stories that need to be told. And we should probably invest in that. Yeah.
And even then you got to soldier on. Even then, you know, with the 24th, everybody told us no. I don't mind. I'll tell him, Kevin, I'm going to tell him. Everybody told us no. Everybody said no.
Wow.
From top to bottom. This whole thing, in my opinion, with what I've seen, was divine. It was time. It was time for this thing to be told, unearthed from the blood and dirt that we stand on and called America. It was time. And it took soldiering. It took, you know, trying to explain and over-explain. It took an Academy Award. You know what I mean? To get people to even, you know, want to begin to have the conversation. But we were blessed, man. It's God. It's us. It's our faith. It's our work. It's our walk. And even then, nobody wants to listen. You know, even then you get, you know, you might not get as much publicity. You might not get as much advertising because it's not the history that, you know, people want to tell. It's the history that they own, not the history that owns them. And I mean, that's literally where we're standing right now. Like, we have something for you in terms of, you know, it's entertaining, it's educational, it's history that you know nothing about, that everybody needs to know. And some people just don't, you know, don't care or don't, you know, stand behind, you know, what it is that you're trying to do for the benefit of not only the film community, but of the world. You're absolutely right. The Latinos need that. Yes, because that's our history. That's our world history. It's not just yours, it's ours. And that's how we communicate. But you sometimes, I think you have to step in the pilot seat, sit in the pilot seat and press on the gas even when people are trying to pull on your brakes, you know?
You know, that thing that just real quick, that thing that Trai was just saying, you know, Black history is American history. Latino history is American history.
That's right.
I mean, it's not the Latino story. It's the American story.
That's what Barack Obama always says. It's not the Latino American history. It's not the Black. It's the United States of American history.
Right. That's right. And you tell Latino history, you're telling American history. And that's what we're fighting for. That's what all of this is all about. That's what we're trying to arrive to, where it's just taken for granted that Latino history is American history, that Black history is American. We don't need the month anymore.
Right, absolutely. You're so right.
It's embedded in the way we just look at American life.
Do you see, from both your perspective, being in the business, do you see us being able to pivot our thinking to, you know, our history is deep rooted in this racism, and we're at the most divisive, you know, in my lifetime. So what's your perspective, and how much do you think films like this will actually be able to play a part in changing and pivoting?
When I was going to NYU, I went to having my family, and we were looking at a place to live in New York. And I must have been on the phone when I called on the realtor. I must have my white voice on.
Boots Riley there, huh?
And the guy told me, he said, "Oh yeah, I got a bunch of places I want to show you. I got them out in Brooklyn, a bunch of places." And this is in the early '80s, right? This is in the '80s, mid '80s. He said, "Oh, a bunch of places I want to show you." So when I walk in the office, he sees me. He goes, "Some of those places aren't going to work out." And then when he took me on the tour, he drove down this one street in Brooklyn, and there were American flags hanging outside of everyone's house. And he said to me, "This is the area that you can't live in." And so when I tell that story, I always say American flags, often when you're coming off the boat and you see the Statue of Liberty, it says welcome, but the American flag also says get out and stay out. Yeah. And that is that duality that we have in this country of, you know, the promise of America and the reality of America, right? This is kind of what the 24th is all about. This is kind of the way that we've always had to live our lives in this country as people of color, that there's this great promise, and then there's this kick in the behind, right? And it just goes in every aspect of our lives. And I think right now, I think the fact that I call him King Tang, if Trump, if we get rid of that dude, and the best thing about Trump is that no one has to be convinced we got a racial problem in America anymore.
Right.
No,
that's true.
Everyone gets it now. That's the best thing he did. I call him the roach whisperer. It's like Obama. Obama was that dude, that when Obama showed up, all the roaches, just like how in the ghetto you turn on the lights, all the roaches off. Obama made all the roaches run away and hide, and he's now the roach whisperer. He walks in, all the roaches and come back out, right? And that is kind of what we. And so the fact that people have responded to George Floyd's death the way they have, the way they've marched, and I mean, all colors, all ages, all classes of folks. This is the promise of America. I mean, this is the best. This is the best of what we do. This is every progressive thing that's happened in the country came out of protests like this. And so the verdict's still out. Obviously, hopefully, we're going to take it to the next step. Hopefully, there'll be police changes. There'll be changes in society. We can move forward with this whole madness. But it's a very, very exciting time right now.
Thank you so much for giving us your time and your insights and telling this story of 24th. When will it be coming out? Is it hitting theaters? Because theaters are going through a weird moment right now. Is it going to be on demand? How can people see this movie?
Sure, yeah. It's in a few theaters around the country right now on Friday, opens on Friday. But mainly you can get it on demand. You can get it on demand on iTunes, on Amazon. You can buy it from Amazon. It's on all the video on demand things from your cable system.